The morning sun cut through the haze above Vienna, glinting off cannon barrels and broken ramparts. Inside the battered city, Count Starhemberg's men were ghosts of soldiers. Hollow-eyed, their uniforms reduced to rags, yet still at their posts. The city's bells had long since fallen silent, shattered by bombardment, but their echoes lived on in the rhythm of the defenders' hearts. Every hour they survived was an act of defiance. Every volley of musket fire, a reminder to the Sultan's army that Vienna still stood. The Ottomans pressed harder now. Their trenches had reached the walls, and tunnels exploded beneath the bastions, sending clouds of stone and blood into the air. Still, when the smoke cleared, the defenders filled the breaches with rubble and corpses, fighting with whatever they could find. The air reeked of powder, sweat, and desperation. In the cellars below, civilians whispered prayers as cannonballs shook the earth above. Starhemberg refused to surrender. "If the city falls, it will fall on our corpses," he told his officers. His defiance became legend long before the battle ended. From dawn till night, he walked among the soldiers, binding wounds, issuing orders, and writing letters to Leopold begging for reinforcements. But the emperor was hundreds of miles away, his court frozen in uncertainty. Then, at last, came word. The Polish king was marching. It spread through the city like wildfire. "Sobieski is coming," the guards shouted, and for the first time in weeks, hope replaced fear. Far to the north, Sobieski's army trudged through mud and mountain passes. His soldiers were hardened veterans. Poles, Lithuanians, Cossacks, and German allies, marching under a single purpose. The road was grueling, but their king rode among them, refusing the comfort of a carriage. "A commander who does not share his army's hardships is no king," he had once said. Every mile toward Vienna was a march toward destiny. By September 10th, they reached the heights of Kahlenberg, overlooking the besieged city. What they saw below froze them. The Ottoman camp stretched like a second city. A sea of silk tents, smoke rising from thousands of fires, cannon lines glimmering in the sun. Between the camp and Vienna, the walls of the city lay shattered, pocked with the black scars of artillery. It looked impossible. But Sobieski only smiled grimly. "This is where we stop them." The following day was spent preparing for battle. The Holy League, Poles and Austrians and Germans, gathered in solemn unity. Sobieski rode from camp to camp, rallying men in their own tongues. His presence carried weight. He was not merely a king. He was the warrior who had already faced the Ottomans and won. When he spoke, even the weary listened. "Tomorrow," he said, "we fight for the soul of Europe. Let no man forget what is at stake down below." Kara Mustafa Pasha remained confident. His army, numbering well over 100,000, had surrounded Vienna for 2 months. He believed the city would soon collapse, and he dismissed reports of a Christian relief force as exaggeration. When scouts confirmed Sobieski's approach, he sneered. "Let them come. We will crush them as we crushed the walls." He ordered his artillery to continue pounding the city, determined to break it before dawn. But dawn came differently than he expected. The mist lifted from the hills, revealing movement in the forests above the plains. Banners, spears, and the shimmer of armor. The Ottomans formed ranks quickly, but the terrain favored the defenders no longer. From the left, imperial troops under Charles of Lorraine pressed down through the woods, clashing with Ottoman outposts. The German infantry advanced in disciplined lines, musket volleys echoing through the trees. To the center, Bavarians and Franconians joined the fight, pushing toward the trenches that had strangled Vienna for weeks. Kara Mustafa watched from his pavilion, furious. His lines were under attack from positions he had thought impassable. "Hold the high ground," he roared, dispatching his janissaries, the elite corps of his army, to reinforce the flanks. The janissaries moved like clockwork, drums pounding, their white turbans gleaming. The battle grew into a storm of noise and chaos. From within the walls, Starhemberg saw the fighting beyond the trenches. He recognized the banners of the relief army and ordered his own sortie. Half-starved defenders surged out of the city, setting fire to Ottoman siege lines and capturing cannons. Their attack was small but perfectly timed, dividing the enemy's attention as Sobieski's army advanced. Hours passed in brutal combat. The sun climbed high, baking the fields where tens of thousands clashed. Smoke rolled across the valley. The Ottomans fought fiercely, their discipline unbroken despite mounting losses. But Sobieski's plan was working. The left and center pinned the Ottomans in place, while his right flank, concealed in the forests, prepared for the decisive blow. There, among the trees, waited the most feared cavalry in Europe, the Polish winged hussars. 20,000 horsemen stood ready, their armor shining like mirrors, their long lances tilted toward the valley below. From their backs rose tall frames adorned with eagle feathers that hissed in the wind. The sight of them struck awe even among their allies. Sobieski turned in his saddle and raised his sword. His words carried over the roar of battle. In the name of God and the Blessed Virgin, charge for Vienna. Charge for Poland. Charge for Christendom. The trumpets blared, the forest erupted. Down the slopes they came, a living thunder rolling over the earth. The hussars descended from Kahlenberg like a wave of iron and fire. The ground shook beneath 20,000 hooves. The Ottomans, already locked in combat with the Allied infantry, turned in shock as the cavalry broke through the trees. Kara Mustafa tried to rally his lines, but it was too late. The impact was cataclysmic. The hussars smashed into the Ottoman ranks like lightning, their lances driving through armor and flesh. The disciplined janissaries broke under the weight of the charge. Sipahi cavalry scattered, unable to withstand the fury. Behind the Poles came the German and Austrian horsemen, following the breach and cutting deep into the enemy camp. The plains turned to chaos. Ottoman soldiers fled in every direction. Banners fell, cannons were abandoned. Kara Mustafa's command post was overrun, his guards slain as the Grand Vizier himself fled on horseback. The once proud siege army dissolved into a river of panic. From the walls of Vienna, the defenders watched in disbelief. Winged cavalry stormed through the Ottoman camp, sunlight flashing off their armor. Starhemberg's exhausted soldiers cheered and wept as they realized the impossible. The siege was broken. The city was saved. As dusk fell, the plains that had once echoed with cannon fire now rang with victory cries. The Ottoman army was in full retreat, leaving behind its tents, weapons, and dead. Vienna had survived. Europe had been saved. The battlefield that evening looked like the end of the world. Smoke hung over the plains in thick gray curtains. Fires burned in the Ottoman camp, consuming silk tents, shattered cannons, and the wreckage of what had been the mightiest army in Europe. The ground was littered with armor, broken lances, and the bodies of men and horses. The roar of battle had given way to the crackle of flame and the cries of the dying. King John III, Sobieski, rode through the chaos, his white plumes streaked with ash, his armor dented and blood-stained. Around him, his soldiers cheered, but their voices carried exhaustion more than triumph. They had fought from dawn to dusk, and though victory was theirs, the cost lay heavy before them. The Polish king raised his hand, halting his men. "Enough pursuit," he ordered. "We have done God's work today." Nearby, Austrian and German officers rode up to meet him. Mud splattered, faces grim but glowing with relief. Count Starhemberg himself, his uniform torn and his left arm bandaged, met Sobieski at the gates of Vienna. The two men dismounted and clasped hands. For a moment, words failed them. Then Starhemberg said quietly, "We owe the city, no Europe, to you." Sobieski shook his head. "To all of us," he replied, "and to the Almighty." Behind them, the battered defenders of Vienna poured from the gates, embracing the Allied soldiers who had come to their rescue. Tears and laughter mingled as survivors reunited. Women handed bread and wine to the exhausted troops, though little remained to give. Church bells that had lain silent for weeks now rang across the city, their sound carried by the wind like a prayer of deliverance. The once proud Ottoman host was broken beyond recognition. Kara Mustafa Pasha fled the battlefield under cover of darkness, abandoning his grand pavilion, a palace of silks, gold-threaded carpets, and untouched feasts that now became spoils for the victors. His retreat turned to panic as Allied cavalry harried his rear guard for miles. Along the Danube, Ottoman soldiers threw away weapons and armor in their desperate flight eastward. The empire's dream of conquering Central Europe had ended in disaster. In Vienna, the dawn after the battle brought silence, the kind that follows a storm too great for words. The city was scarred and blackened. Whole districts lay in ruins, and the stench of smoke and death lingered in every street. Yet the people emerged from cellars and ruins with something stronger than fear: survival. Starhemberg immediately set to restoring order. Fires were extinguished, the wounded were tended, and the dead were buried where they fell. Churches filled with worshippers giving thanks, while priests sang hymns of gratitude through cracked voices. For the citizens, the sight of Sobieski riding through the city's gates became a vision they would never forget. A king not of Vienna, but of salvation itself. The Polish hussars, their wings still rattling faintly in the breeze, paraded through the streets to the roar of the crowd. Even hardened soldiers wept as they passed, their armor gleaming in the morning sun. Tales of their charge, the thunder of hooves from Kahlenberg Hill, the crash that shattered the Ottoman lines, spread instantly across Europe. Painters, poets, and chroniclers would soon immortalize that moment, but for those who saw it with their own eyes, no embellishment was needed. In the Allied camps, officers gathered to take stock of the victory. The numbers spoke for themselves. Tens of thousands of Ottoman dead, hundreds of captured cannons, and an army in total disarray. The Holy League had won a victory so absolute that it redrew the balance of power across the continent. Yet even amid triumph, there was unease. Sobieski knew this battle was a turning point, but not an end. The empire will lick its wounds, he warned, and return one day. We must be ready. Word of the victory raced across Europe faster than any courier could carry it. In Rome, Pope Innocent XI fell to his knees in gratitude when the news arrived. Bells rang throughout Italy, France, and Germany. In Poland, crowds gathered in churches and marketplaces to celebrate the king who had saved Christendom. Letters of praise flooded Sobieski's camp, though he himself remained humble, writing to his wife, "All glory be to God. I came, I saw, and God conquered for Kara Mustafa. The retreat was nothing short of humiliation. The army he led, the pride of the Ottoman Empire, had been shattered." When he reached Belgrade, messengers from Constantinople awaited him with the Sultan's seal. The Grand Vizier was stripped of his titles and soon after executed, strangled with the silken cord of royal judgment. His failure at Vienna marked not only his death, but the end of Ottoman expansion into Europe. The empire would never again threaten the continent with such force. Vienna, meanwhile, began the long task of recovery. The city's walls were rebuilt, its bastions strengthened, and its people honored the fallen. Memorials rose where the fiercest fighting had taken place. Markets reopened, trade resumed, and the scars of siege slowly healed. But the memory of those 2 months, the hunger, the bombardment, the endless courage, would remain forever in its stones. Sobieski and his army departed Vienna as heroes. Crowds lined the roads to see them off, cheering and waving flags as the king rode past. To the Austrians, he was the savior of their capital. To all of Europe, the man who had stopped the crescent at the threshold of Christendom, his name became legend. In the months that followed, the victory at Vienna sparked a new confidence across Christian Europe. The Holy League, now united by shared triumph, pushed deeper into territories once thought untouchable. Battles were fought and won in Hungary and the Balkans, reversing a century of Ottoman advance. For the first time in generations, Europe's borders were moving eastward, not retreating from them. The Battle of Vienna had not just saved a city, it had changed history's direction. As winter settled over Austria, the streets that once echoed with cannon fire filled again with music and laughter. Churches glowed with candlelight. Families gathered where they had once hidden in fear. And above the city's rooftops, a single banner flew, the Cross of Victory, standing where the crescent had once threatened to rise. Europe slept safely again, not because the Ottomans had vanished, but because men like Sobieski and Starhemberg had proven that even empires could bleed. The charge from Kahlenberg would echo through centuries, a moment when faith, courage, and unity turned despair into destiny. The days following the victory felt like waking from a nightmare. Vienna, once trembling under the shadow of destruction, now breathed again. The people moved through streets filled with debris and the scent of gunpowder, trying to comprehend that they were alive, that the Ottoman tide had truly been turned back. The walls, though shattered, stood as proud scars of defiance. Everywhere one looked, there was proof that courage had triumphed over fear. Count Starhemberg became the city's symbol of resilience. His name was spoken with reverence in every home. The citizens saw in him not a nobleman, but a man who refused to yield when all seemed lost. He walked among the ruins daily, refusing celebration until the wounded were tended and the dead honored. "They gave their lives for this city," he said to his men, "and we will remember them in every stone we rebuild." His command had outlasted hunger, cannon fire, and despair, and history would never forget it. In the grand cathedral of St. Stephen, survivors and soldiers gathered for a mass of thanksgiving. The bells tolled again, this time not in warning but in praise. The hymns rose over the city like the lifting of a great weight. Starhemberg stood beside King John III Sobieski, both men marked by exhaustion but united in purpose. When the priest called for prayer, Sobieski knelt and bowed his head. "Vienna is saved," he murmured, "but Europe still needs saving." For though victory had come, the war was far from over. The Ottomans were retreating, but they were not destroyed. Beyond the horizon, the empire still held vast lands, armies, and ambitions. Sobieski knew that only continued unity could secure what had been won. To that end, he met with commanders of the Holy League, Austrian, Bavarian, and Saxon leaders, to forge a path forward. It was a meeting not of politics, but of vision. "Let us show the world," Sobieski declared, "that our faith and courage can hold more power than fear ever did." While alliances were sealed in tents and chapels, the people of Vienna began to rebuild. Markets reopened, artisans repaired what cannonballs had torn apart, and families reunited. Children played among broken stones where soldiers had fought only days before. The city's pulse returned, slow and steady. The scars would remain, but so too would the pride that had risen from them. Across Europe, news of the battle spread like wildfire. Messengers galloped from court to court, carrying tales of the miracle at Vienna. In Rome, Pope Innocent XI wept openly upon hearing of the victory, declaring it divine intervention. Churches held processions of gratitude from Naples to Warsaw. In Paris and Madrid, nobles toasted the bravery of the Polish king and the defenders who had held the line. The image of the winged hussars, gleaming armor, feathered wings, and unstoppable courage became legend overnight. Poets compared Sobieski to ancient heroes. Painters rushed to capture the thunder of his charge down Kahlenberg Hill, while scholars wrote of the battle as the moment Europe's fate was rewritten. But Sobieski himself refused flattery. In his letters home, he wrote to his wife, Queen Marie Casimir, I did only what was required. We saved Vienna so that Poland may live. If God wills, Europe shall remain free. His humility only deepened his legend. Meanwhile, the defeated Ottoman army staggered eastward in disgrace. Thousands deserted along the way. Those who survived the long retreat spread word of catastrophe, a disaster born not from weakness, but from arrogance. In Constantinople, Sultan Mehmed IV received the terrible news in silence. His Grand Vizier, Kara Mustafa, who had promised the Sultan victory and glory, had instead delivered humiliation. The Sultan's judgment was swift. Kara Mustafa was executed in Belgrade, strangled by the silk cord reserved for failed servants of the throne. His fall marked the end of Ottoman dominance in Europe. From that moment, the empire's decline began. Slowly at first, but irreversibly. The siege of Vienna had not only broken an army, it had broken the illusion of Ottoman invincibility. The frontier between East and West would never again move so close to the heart of Europe. The victory had drawn a line in history, one that even centuries later would be remembered as the day an empire stopped expanding. Winter settled over the city like a healing shroud. Snow fell softly over the repaired walls and the graves of the fallen. Candles flickered in windows, prayers whispered for peace that might finally last. Soldiers who had fought shoulder to shoulder returned home, carrying both pride and grief. Many never spoke of the horrors they had seen, the endless cannon fire, the smell of blood and smoke. But their silence said enough. King Sobieski returned to Poland to a hero's welcome. Crowds flooded the streets, banners waved, and church bells rang in his honor. Yet the king remained solemn. "The glory belongs to God," he told the crowds. "Let no man think himself greater than the cause he serves." Behind his humility was a mind already turning to the future. He knew that victory alone would not preserve peace. Vigilance would. In Vienna, memorials began to rise. Sculptors carved scenes of the siege and the final charge, capturing forever the faces of those who had stood against the storm. A statue of Sobieski was commissioned, depicting him on horseback, sword raised high, eyes fixed eastward, a reminder that courage had once saved a continent. Europe itself was transformed by the battle's aftermath. The Holy League, once a fragile coalition of rivals, grew stronger in unity. Austrian forces, inspired by Sobieski's triumph, advanced into Hungary, reclaiming lands lost to the Ottomans. The momentum of the Christian powers surged, beginning a century-long reversal of Ottoman influence in Europe. The balance of power had shifted, not merely by arms, but by the belief that no empire was invincible. In time, the siege of Vienna became more than history. It became a symbol of resistance, faith, and unity in the face of impossible odds. For generations, storytellers would recount the charge of the winged hussars, the courage of the defenders, and the steadfast resolve of a king who chose to fight not for conquest, but for survival. And as centuries passed, Vienna itself thrived, rebuilt, radiant, and unbowed. Its skyline of spires and domes stood as a living monument to that September day in 1683 when Europe was saved not by walls, but by will. The snows of winter blanketed the battlefields outside Vienna, softening the scars of war, but not the memories that lingered beneath. Beneath the white silence lay fragments of cannon, broken lances, and the bones of thousands, silent witnesses to the day the fate of Europe had turned. The Danube ran dark and slow, carrying with it the ashes of a fallen empire's ambition. Within the city, life pulsed once more. Merchants reopened their stalls, children ran through squares once shattered by shell fire, and the tolling of church bells marked not alarm, but renewal. Vienna's streets, though still scarred, became a living monument to endurance. Atop every rebuilt wall and bastion, flags fluttered in the winter wind, the cross now flying where the crescent had once threatened to rise. Count Starhemberg, the man who had refused surrender when all logic demanded it, was celebrated as a savior of Christendom. He refused medals or titles beyond those he had earned, insisting that the true glory belonged to the ordinary citizens who carried stones, muskets, and faith to the ramparts. When asked how he had endured, he answered simply, because surrender was not an option. His words became Vienna's creed. Far beyond Austria, the echoes of the battle reached every court in Europe. In Warsaw, Sobieski's name was spoken with reverence. In Rome, the Pope called him the defender of the faith. Even in Paris and London, where politics often overshadowed principle, the victory was hailed as a miracle. The Ottoman Empire, once the terror of Europe, had been humbled. Its armies shattered, its pride wounded, its dream of conquering the West forever extinguished. But the story did not end with victory alone. The Battle of Vienna reshaped the continent in ways no one could yet foresee. In the months that followed, alliances strengthened, borders shifted, and nations found new confidence. The Holy League, that unlikely coalition of faith and necessity, turned its gaze eastward. Austria reclaimed territories in Hungary and pushed deeper into the Balkans. For the first time in generations, Europe advanced instead of retreating. Sobieski, though triumphant, did not seek conquest. He returned to Poland not as a conqueror, but as a servant of destiny. His letters spoke of humility and warning. Let no king think himself above the task of defense, for when pride blinds us, ruin follows. He knew that victory demanded unity, and unity demanded humility, a lesson too easily forgotten in the courts of kings. In Constantinople, the shock of defeat rippled through the empire. The Sultan's advisors whispered of omens and curses, of divine wrath and political failure. The execution of Kara Mustafa Pasha was meant to erase shame, but it could not undo the truth that the Ottoman army had been broken, not by numbers, but by resolve. From that day forward, the empire's power would begin to ebb, slowly but irrevocably. Artists across Europe captured the victory in oil and marble. Painters depicted the winged hussars descending from Kahlenberg Hill, feathers blazing in the sunlight. Poets wrote of the thunder of hooves and the clash of faith and empire. In cathedrals, choirs sang hymns to commemorate the day God's providence spared Europe from conquest. The story of Vienna became legend. Not just a battle won, but a symbol of what courage united could achieve. In the years that followed, Vienna grew into the heart of European resilience and culture. Its people carried both the pride and the trauma of the siege. They built monuments to the fallen, raised spires toward the heavens, and carved into stone the names of those who had stood against the tide. The memory of the siege lived not as mourning, but as identity, a reminder of how close the darkness had come and how fiercely it had been repelled. For King John III, Sobieski, the legacy of that September day became both blessing and burden. Though he returned home victorious, his later years were marked by the weight of politics and waning power. Poland, for all its glory, remained entangled in internal divisions that no battlefield triumph could erase. Yet in history's eyes, Sobieski had already secured immortality. His name stood beside those of Alexander, Caesar, and Charles the Great, men who had altered the course of civilizations. He often spoke modestly of that fact, saying, "I am but a soldier who answered a cry." But others saw him differently. To Europe, he was the man who arrived when all seemed lost, who turned the tide not with diplomacy, but with the thunder of hooves and the faith of a single prayer. As the decade passed, the ripples of Vienna's salvation reached every corner of the continent. The Ottoman Empire's aura of invincibility faded. The Holy League pressed its advantage, reclaiming fortresses and cities long thought lost. New generations of commanders drew inspiration from Sobieski's charge, studying his tactics and courage as a model for the wars yet to come. And in Vienna itself, time worked its quiet magic. The broken walls were rebuilt stronger than before. New markets rose over burned-out quarters, and the laughter of children replaced the echo of cannons. On anniversaries of the battle, processions wound through the city, carrying banners of the cross and singing hymns of remembrance. Old veterans in patched uniforms stood side by side with priests and nobles, their faces lit by torchlight as they whispered thanks for the life they had been spared. The siege of Vienna had become more than an event. It was a story passed from father to son, a warning and a promise alike. A reminder that even when the world darkens and the enemy seems unbreakable, courage and unity can light the way. When Sobieski died years later, Europe mourned him as one of its greatest heroes. His funeral was a pageant of nations, envoys from across Christendom attending to pay tribute to the man who had stood at the edge of history and turned it back. As his coffin was borne through Krakow, crowds lined the streets in silence. And as the church bells tolled, their echoes seemed to reach all the way back to that September morning when a king looked down from Kahlenberg Hill and made the decision that saved Europe. In the centuries that followed, empires would rise and fall, borders would shift, and the world would change beyond recognition. Yet the memory of that moment endured, of the wings that thundered from the hills, of the city that would not yield, and of the king who led a charge that reshaped history. The Battle of Vienna became a lesson written into the soul of Europe. That courage shared is stronger than fear, that unity born of necessity can become destiny, and that even at the edge of annihilation, hope can charge with wings.